Well, good evening. How are you doing this evening? Good. It is good to see you. We'll try this at this service. He is risen. Good. You guys got it. That's great. Well, I got up here at 4, and I was hoping I'd have, a service with light attendance to work out my jitters a little bit, and everybody thought they'd show up early and beat the crowds. So now, a lot of pressure is going to land on you guys, though, because I threw in a really bad joke, unplanned, and I may decide to try it again. And so your response will determine whether it makes it in actual Easter Sunday or not. So the pressure's on. All right, well, let's dive in here, and we're going to start kind of a weird way. But imagine this. The year is 2600 BC. And there's this woman who lived in Mesopotamia. Now, I doubt the first thing you thought about when you woke up today was a woman who lived 4,000 years ago in modern-day southern Iraq, right? Probably not, but we're going to talk about her for a minute before we get to the rest of the message. And this woman remembers the night when she was sitting around the village campfire in her teen years, and when she first noticed him noticing her. She'd seen him before, but there was something a little different twinkle in his eye that night, right? Made her heart beat a little faster. Over the next few weeks, they would chat a little bit around the town well, and her friends and her would laugh afterwards about his shy, awkward attempts at small talk. But she couldn't stop what she was beginning to feel, and quite frankly, she didn't want to. She hoped that he would go and speak to her father about them having a future together. And she'll always remember when her servant ran in and gleefully announced that the man had just showed up at their house and he was in meeting with her father right now. She just felt an incredible amount of excitement and began to dream about her future, about joy, about family. Of course, that was years ago. Years of hoping, waiting, wondering when or if a child would ever come along. It's a struggle that's gone through the ages, right? For some. She would watch the forces that, she thought control the moon, bring the moon up and down throughout the month along with her hopes and dreams. She remembered all the prayers lifted up to the gods and all the sacrifices that were offered, but so far to no avail. Now, she and pretty much everyone in the culture in the world at that time had rumors of a time, an ancient time of a golden age when the gods had enlightened humanity, but that was a long time ago. That was before a cataclysm. In fact, there were accounts that were passed down. She could count them 10 generations, great, her grandpa, of surviving that cataclysm. And of a time when the rumors were that the gods were closer, but now the gods felt distant. The gods felt capricious. They were very far away. And they would come, they would offer sacrifices, grain, lambs for their favor. They would have their requests, but many times it felt like the gods just didn't care. Or maybe the gods were angry. In fact, if you go back to this part of the world, ancient Mesopotamia, they worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses. Hundreds and hundreds, potentially thousands, right? They had a god named El that was the fatherly deity. They had a god named Enlil, the god of air, wind, and storms. Shamash, the god of sun and justice. In fact, I saw this name and I texted my wife as I was writing because I'm like, didn't you have a cat named Shamash? I'm like, this would explain a lot about this whole weird cat relationship. Anyway, you can... She corrected me. It was called Shemesh, which means sun in Hebrew, but very close. So I was like, there's some cat history there for those that are new. A goddess named Ningirshad. She was the mother goddess associated with fertility and the earth, and our character was very familiar with pleading with her for her favor. Later, these gods would develop into all sorts of different expressions, right? In the Canaanite region, you'd have Baal, the god of lightning. The Babylonians would have Marduk. The Greeks would worship Artemis, who ironically was the goddess both of hunting and the protector of small animals. Like, work that one out. You hope you're not the Easter Bunny on a wrong day. Like, sorry, soup. They had Ninkasi, who is the Sumerian goddess of beer. True story. Like, as ancient historians dug through, they actually found poems and hymns that were written in worship and celebration of her. In modern times, we call that country western music. But there was a problem in the ancient world, and the problem when it came to all these gods and goddesses, because they were seen as capricious forces over nature and human life, and our character was often reminded that she had no control over these forces, and she always was unsure of where she stood with them. Things went poorly with the crops. All they thought was, well, maybe we didn't bring enough. And so when there was a season of drought or a season, where the crops failed, they would bring crops, which they didn't have much of. And then they would wonder, did we bring enough? Because it doesn't seem to be doing anything. If things went well one year and you had a banner crop, actually, what do you have to do? Well, you got to bring what? More. Why? Because you don't want to offend the gods and make them think you're ungrateful. And sometimes when droughts would extend on and on for a period of time and things went really poorly, the gods would demand extreme sacrifices. They never knew where they stood with the gods. And it created this deep sense of anxiety in humanity, never knowing if one had appeased the gods sufficiently to gain this sort of favor with these forces outside their control. And sometimes in order to try to gain favor, they would go to extreme acts of devotion. You see some of those noted in the Hebrew scriptures. And then also in secular history, as you go back, you see followers of Baal were known to slash themselves as a sort of a way of shedding their own blood to demonstrate their deep devotion to the god. You had a god in modern day, like ancient Turkey, modern day Turkey, Asia Minor. This god was Kibla, was known as the mother goddess, who would ensure fertility and good harvest. And here was the awkward thing about this goddess. For the men, you didn't quite know how to relate to this female deity. And so some probably prophetess at some point said, here's how you're going to do it, guys. You're going to show an ultimate act of your devotion, men. And so history tells us that at one point in Sardis, modern day, ancient Sardis, 4,000 to 5,000 men castrated themselves and put it on the altar. And the guys are all squirming right now, and the rest of you are like, this is the weirdest Easter message I have ever heard. I don't think I've ever heard that word in an Easter message. It's going somewhere, I hope, you hope. But the ultimate sacrifice when things really didn't go well? The ultimate sacrifice when slashing yourself, harming, disfiguring your own person wasn't enough, you would give your firstborn. You see this practice all over the world, including in North America with the Incas. Ancient times, the Hebrew scriptures talk about the detestable god Molech, where they actually, those that had abandoned the God of the Bible and gone after this god Molech would offer their children by burning them alive in the fires of Molech as part of a ritual to appease this god seeking favor and protection. This is the kind of world our character lived in. This is the kind of world that the characters that we see in the Hebrew scriptures lived in. And so, it's in this context that we find actually the intersection of the redemptive plan of the one true God. The narrative account from the Hebrew Scriptures tells us that into this world, God introduces a brand new day. And this begins in a profound way in Genesis chapter 12, when a divine voice speaks to one man. He calls him, his name's Abraham. You've heard of him probably. He says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land that I will show you. Abandon what was so profound about this. It's abandon your father's gods, the one who taught you how to interact with all these forces of the universe. Abandon that, walk away, trust me. He's called to leave, and he does. He trusts the voice of this God. And then this God makes an incredible promise to Abraham that he couldn't really even wrap his mind around. He changes his name to Abraham, which means the father of many nations. He said, I will make you into a great nation. All the people on earth will be blessed through you. Only one problem. He couldn't have a child. He was elderly, and he and his wife had no child. But we're told that Abraham believed God. He trusted him, and it was credited to him as righteousness. 25 years later, the promised child comes, the promise is fulfilled, and he and his wife have a son named Isaac. And that's where we pick up the text in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. And here's what it says. It says this, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Pay attention to that name. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain that I will show you. All of a sudden, this hopeful narrative takes a very dark turn. Like, whoa, time out. What? Now, I want to point out a couple things to you before we move on. Number one, this is the first mention of love in the Hebrew Scriptures. Your only son, whom you love. Your son, your only son, who you love. Take him. Sacrifice him. Where? In the region of Moriah. Here's what happens. Verse 3 says, early the next morning, Abraham got up, loaded his donkey. He took him with him and two of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. Now, our character, you might have figured out her name by now. It's Sarah. This morning, her husband was elusive, intense. All the years of praying for a child, she'd never seen him this way. Even all the years of like pain and frustration, never seen him this way. And she didn't know why, because he wouldn't tell her what was going on, but her heart filled with dread as she watched Abraham march away that day. He leaves the son, an animal, some wood, some servants, and they head out. It says this, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Verse 6 says this, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. So he's carrying the wood now, his son, and he himself carried the fire, the coals, in a container, and the knife, and the two of them went on together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place that God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now, time out. Because if you grew up in church, you probably know where this story's going. And so if that's you, just time out for a minute and let's view this from the perspective of someone reading this for the first time. What an awful story. What an awful story. It has a happy ending. Disclaimer, okay? Sorry if that spoils it for you. The book's been out a while, so Hang in there. But just on its face, what a troubling, awful story. I don't know if you've thought about this. Number one, it's like, what does it say about this God? Number two, Abraham is credited as being this incredibly righteous guy, but you realize why he is. Because he is willing to kill his own son. That's troubling. And for many people, they get to stories like this in the scripture. Perhaps this is where some of you have come from, and you're like, this is so barbaric, so repressive, so backwards. This is supposed to be good news? Now, it has a good ending, but still, like, what's up with it, right? And here's what you have to understand. So there's a lot going on here. Now, the rabbis think that Isaac was about 12 years old. You know why they say that? Because if he was 1 year older, it wouldn't really be a sacrifice. Okay, you guys did better. We might keep it Sunday. I didn't botch it that time. All right. Sorry, that's a bad dad joke. But let me just say, like, in the midst of all this tension, why, have you ever wondered why didn't Abraham just say, no way? Or why Abraham didn't say, I think that must have been like the pepperoni pizza. You know, that's a weird vision. Like, why did he get up and leave and load the wood and go to actually do this thing where he's actually now standing with the knife ready to do it? I'm just telling you, if any of you come into my office, we sit down, we do a little counseling session, and you're like, I really feel like God's telling me to go kill my child, I'll be like, time out. We're going to call law enforcement first, and then we're going to get your head screwed on straight. Because that's not the heart of God. We know that, right? Well, here's what you have to understand. This is how we know that. This is how we know that. See, because in this day, guess what? This is what the gods did. The gods demanded sacrifice, and they demanded the ultimate sacrifice many times. And that means when the God says, I need your firstborn son, you give your firstborn son. And so Abraham is doing the only logical thing in that culture, in this context, in this time. So you could probably know how this part of the story ends. It says this, but the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied, do not lay a hand on your boy. Whew, he said. He says, the angel said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. See this story, this part of the story doesn't just end with, oh, Abraham was such a great guy. No, this ends on the character of God, and here's what we see about the character of God. Number one, God's a God that says, time out, don't do that, that's not my heart. Over and over in the scriptures, we see that repeated. That's why he calls Molech, the detestable god Molech, that thing that he hates. When they would sacrifice children. But number two, here's what you see about God. Abraham saw in the thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns, and he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place what? The Lord will provide. As to this day, it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. I love that. On the mountain, what mountain? The mountain of Moriah, right? In the region of Moriah. On this mountain, it will be provided. God is a God, unlike all the other gods they understood, who demanded that you give them the ultimate sacrifice. God instead provides for Abraham. It's a very powerful, prophetic illustration. It's a very powerful illustration. All right, so flash forward in the narrative of the Hebrew Scriptures just a little bit, like about 500 years or so. Afterwards, the people that God keeps his promise. They turn into a great nation, and he then redeems them out of slavery in Egypt and takes them into the desert. And there he gives them what we know as the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, our Old Testament, right? And so part of that, if you've ever been reading through a Bible plan and you got to like your first time, because most people, they just like, I'm going to read the Bible, so they start at page 1. Just quick tip, John 1 is the best spot to start. And then you can come back and read the whole thing. It's amazing. You should read it. But a better place to start is John 1, because the Bible is actually 66 books that make up a collection. Okay, anyway, off the bunny trail. So, but if you've ever been reading through and you got to the book of Leviticus, and your first time through, how many of you finished it? Do we have 2 or 3 of you in the room? We have a few of you. Good job. Well done. But if you've ever read it, you're like, if your eyes don't glaze over first, if you actually stop and pay attention, you're like, what in the world is this? It's just like, kill stuff. How violent. This is like a bad Halloween movie. What in the world? What's going on here? And again, people look at it and go, that's the problem with religion. It's so backwards. It's so repressive. And let me just say, like I said, the scriptures did not emerge in a vacuum. They did not emerge in modern society. They emerge in the context of the people to which they were written in. And what is that people? It's a people that only understand the gods demand, and you never know where you stand with the gods. And sometimes you got to give the ultimate sacrifice and offer your child. And it's into that context that the book of Leviticus comes. And you know, like the first 5 sacrifices in the book of Leviticus, here's what they're called. They're called the Olah, it's the burnt offering. That which ascends, the Mina, the grain or tribute offering, the Shelamim, the peace or fellowship offering, the Hatat, which is the sin or the purification offering, the Asham, the guilt or reparation offering. There will be a test on the way out, so take good notes. It's open book. But here's what you got to know, and here's the significance. As you look at each of these specific offerings, there's something very significant about them. The first one is this, that God invites his people in worship to draw near, not to cower in fear. That's huge. Draw near. The gods didn't do that. They were distant. They were capricious. This God invites his people to draw near. The second thing is this. You could come and you had a set offering. Once a year, you would bring a lamb for you and your family. If you were poor, you only had to bring a pair of doves. The lamb that was offered, parts of it were offered as a sacrifice, and then the meat was given to like the whole priestly class, from the Levites to provide for their needs. Big barbecue, basically. But you could come and you could offer a sacrifice that you could afford, and then you walk away knowing it's a done deal. I'm assured of God's forgiveness. Me and God, we're okay. I don't have to wonder where I stand with the gods. For this year, I'm good. In fact, that offering called the Shelamim, it comes from the word shalom, which literally means peace or wholeness. And the Shelamim offering is you can have peace with God, a wholeness with God. You don't have to come and wonder where you stand. You can actually walk away from here going, peace. Now, some of you read it and you're like, that's so backward and impressive. Here's what you have to understand. When it was given, about 3,500 years ago, this was revolutionary. This was a whole new day. This was amazing. In fact, it was really hard for the people because all of the nations around them thought, no, we don't know where we stand with the gods. And so over and over the next hundreds and hundreds of years, the people of God, the people of Israel kept getting pulled back, saying maybe, we're kind of having some drought this year. Maybe we better go and follow that God and sacrifice to that God. And that's the thing that God addresses them on over and over through the prophets. Come back to me. Draw near to me. Pay attention. You can have peace with me. Now, Flash forward a little bit. You got a king. Israel has a king. His name's David. And he has a heart for God. And so he wants to build, he's actually told by a prophet to build an altar and to build it at a very specific place. Any Bible nerds know that place? It's the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And David actually, the guy wants to give it to him, and David says, no, I insist on paying it. I don't want to give something to God that costs me nothing. Well, David's son ends up coming and building a temple. David builds an altar there on the threshing floor. And then in that spot, Solomon builds a temple to the Lord. And you know what that spot is called? It says Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. The same place where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David. And they build this place where this people can come and they can worship the one true God. And they can, for that year, know, I'm okay with God. I'm okay. Well, hundreds of years come by. The people go into idolatry. The temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. Sometime later, as a remnant returns, it's rebuilt, but it's not very fancy until Herod comes along. Herod was king before Jesus was born, or when Jesus was born. Herod the Great. He spends a crazy amount of money and builds a wonder of the world, 2 or 3 million blocks, and builds the most impressive temple you have ever seen. It is just phenomenal. And one day, a Jewish rabbi walks in to that temple, and he begins to say some very disturbing things, because what had happened over the time leading up to this is there's a whole class of religious leaders. They're known as the Sadducees, and they begin to control this whole temple system, and it becomes a very, very lucrative business for them. What was given by God, just, in the Torah, a set of laws to build your life on. These are the family rules for our nation. Here's how you can know you have peace with God. They add thousands upon thousands of regulations and check boxes and made it actually hard for the people to come to God. And where God's heart shows compassion in the Old Testament and mercy, they didn't have that. They became incredibly, incredibly wealthy through this religious system, through the corruption of it all. And I'm really glad that never happens in modern time. But Jesus, this rabbi, he walks into that temple and he begins to say some very provocative things. He says, one greater than the temple is here. And everybody's looking around. It's Jesus. He says this. He says, he actually does this dramatic thing in this week we call Holy Week. A couple days before he's crucified, he comes into the temple with a whip he's made of cords, and he drives out the money changers, and he says, this is meant to be a house of prayer. You've turned it into a den of robbers. And he drives them, and he flips over the tables. See, Jesus is not just like, there's something deeper going on here. Jesus is making a point. Like when you and I in modern times, we just want to make a point, we post a meme. Take that. Jewish times, they would do this dramatic rebel theater. And this is what Jesus is doing, this like dramatic prophetic act, and it's prophesying judgment. See, what Jesus is saying is there's something new happening. Solomon, great temple, Herod's temple, great, something greater than the temple is here. Then Jesus says this particularly provocative statement. They've been building this temple for 40 years. They're still remodeling it at the time of Jesus. And Jesus walks in and he says, destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. To which Dave in accounting over here says, excuse me, you know that took 40 years? course, he wasn't talking about the physical temple, was he? He says, John says he was talking about his body that he would give. And what is 3 days? Oh, wait, I saw 3 days before. Abraham, 3 days. 3 days. Mount Moriah. You know what else Jesus said? He said, Abraham saw my day, and he was glad. And you know, when in Genesis, when Abraham goes out, Winston told me this because he researched it. He preached on this passage in John. And he researched this, and there's this little word, from afar. He saw the mountain from afar. It can mean two things. A long distance. It can also mean a long time. And I think as Jesus says this, he understands, I gave Abraham a prophetic vision of what actually would occur, to take away, to provide for not just the sacrifice to replace his son, but for the sins of the world. See, on Mount Moriah, the heart of the message is God stopped Abraham, but God gave himself. That's why when John looks at the big picture of what was going on, he tells us, hey, here's what you have to understand. This is all about the fact that God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Oh, you remember? Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love. God gave his only son. This is where it was pointing to. In fact, in Colossians, the author of the book of Colossians gives us this picture. It's a little letter, and he goes, man, let me tell you what was going on. It was a much bigger thing than you understand. This wasn't just some prophet killed. He says, no, here's what was happening. He says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, in Jesus. All his fullness. And this like bends our minds. It's a big theological word, the Trinity, right? That God is three persons in one. And we're like, I don't get it. It's because you're finite. You didn't create the universe. So get over it. You won't be able to ever fully wrap your mind around this, that God is truly three and yet one. And God sends his son. He said all the fullness of deity dwelled in him. And through him, what was he doing? He was doing something much bigger, to reconcile all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood that was shed on the cross. He said, no, you don't get it. You don't understand how amazing this was. This wasn't just a sacrifice for sin. God was actually making peace, that there's peace with God available to all humanity. In fact, the author of Hebrews, as he looks at this whole Old Testament system all the way back to Leviticus and the new day, the thing that God's doing in this new era. Here's how he processes it all. The author's brilliant, and here's what the author says. He says this, but he, Jesus, has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Isn't that cool? The culmination of the ages. He's like, there's something eternal. There's something massive that's going on here. You got to wrap your minds around it. And he came to offer himself once for all. Different day. As revolutionary as that was in the day, that you can walk away for a year and be like, okay, I'm okay with God right now. It was never enough. You still had to come back year after year after year. In fact, here's what he says. He goes on, he says, just as people are destined to die once. Nobody gets out of here unless Jesus comes back. Nobody gets out of here. 100% rate. I checked. Just as people are destined to die once, and after that, to face judgment. Everyone, we're told in the scriptures, Jesus said, we'll all stand before him, our Creator, someday. He says, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many. And he will appear a second time. He's coming back again. Not to bear sin. He did that the first time, once and for all, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting on him. And here's the big picture. It's that you are saved when you put your faith and trust in Jesus. You are saved. And it is accomplished fully. You receive the full benefit of that when he comes back. That's the heart of what he's saying in Hebrews. But today you live into that because it's true and it's real. That's what he's saying. Verse 1, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. He said, yeah. Go back. As amazing as the law was, as revolutionary in the time, it was just a shadow. It was just pointed, like, I see my shadow down there. But that's not the reality. It was like a signpost pointing to Jesus the whole time. The whole system, it's all just pointing to Jesus, to the ultimate final sacrifice. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices, repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. It says actually, they come back year after year, but it doesn't actually do it. In fact, it says this, those sacrifices are what? Annual reminders of sin. So year after year, you come. It's not actually... In fact, here's what it says. It's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Like what? Did you think it was actually like really taking it away? No, it was put there for you. Because as you look at a culture around, you can come do this thing annually. Remind yourself, I need a Savior. Remind yourself, I have a broken relationship with God, but man, he's making the way for me. And all through the Old Testament, you showed your trust in him by doing that according to what he said. Looking forward to the moment when ultimately, because Moses prophesied of one who is coming, of the one who would fully take it. It's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. And then the author of Hebrews goes on. He talks about the new covenant. And it's beautiful. I'm going to skip through a few verses because it's really dense. But here's what Jesus came, and we see this at the Last Supper where Jesus institutes the new covenant, where he says, this is my blood shed for you. This is my body. We remember that every time we take communion. We look back to what he did for us on the cross. And here's what he said, this is the covenant I will make with them. He's quoting Jeremiah, the prophet. After that time, says the Lord, I will put my laws in their hearts. I will write them on their minds. Their sins and their lawless acts, I will remember no more. And here's the promise, guys. See, I think as I look at our hearts, man, we live in a broken world. You don't have to look very far to recognize that. And I think even though we feel like in modern times we're so much more sophisticated than those people back there, we have similar gods. We just call them by different names. And for so many people, they live with such a deep sense of anxiety. And you know where I think ultimately at the root where that comes from? I think deep within us there's an echo that understands at some point the relationship with God was broken. That's what the Hebrew Scriptures tell us. That humanity sinned, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There's a brokenness. And even though people could come and say, okay, it's okay for this year, they're still every year, right? And for so many, they live in this constant pattern of wondering and feeling and this underlying motivation, even though they might not put it this way. Some people are like, well, I don't really believe in God. Okay. But I still think there's this deep unsettledness within your heart that knows something's broken. Something's not as it was intended to be. And that drives so much anxiety, drives so much pain. I was talking to Shay, one of our youth pastors, before church. He came from a ministry in San Diego where lots of kids in the youth group, they would physically hurt themselves, cut themselves. And that reminds me of why to feel something or to distract from a pain. And if you're struggling with this, man, there's hope, there's freedom in Jesus. And there's real help needed too, right? People that despair of life. Our valley, we know that big time, statistically. People that just get to the end of it and say, I just can't go on. And I think the underlying cause of that is this deep sense of something's not right between me and my Maker. And we can distract ourselves. We come up with a million ways to distract ourselves in modern society, don't we? We can medicate ourselves. But there's that underlying sense that something's broken. I got an off week. Anybody have an off weeks? Or you're just like, it's nothing like major, but it's like Easter weekend. It's supposed to be like charging it, getting ready. Just off. Just reminded, this world's broken. And here's the thing. I'm not going to stand here and tell you, if you respond in the way I'm going to give you an invitation to respond to Jesus, that all your problems are going to go away. Some of them won't. Some might. Here's what I am going to tell you, because I've seen it. That he can begin to give you that sense of peace. That when you embrace what he did for you and you simply rest in what he says, you can begin to experience peace. You can begin to experience shalom, the wholeness. You can begin to move forward into freedom. And many times it's a process that takes time. Sometimes it takes counseling. But you can move towards freedom and life. And here's the guarantee is when you embrace what Jesus did for you, you know you can have peace with God. That's the promise of resurrection. Jesus didn't stay in the grave. He didn't just pay the debt and stay there. No, he rose. Why? They called it the eighth day. Why? Because it's a new day. It's new creation. It's new life. That's what resurrection's about. That's why the author of Hebrews concludes this little statement. He goes on, but I'm going to read you these couple more verses, and I'm going to invite the band up as I do. Here's what he says. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus and by a new and living way opened for us, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings. Did you get that? Full assurance. You know that you can have, this is the promise of Jesus, the one who predicted his own death and resurrection and pulled it off. You can have full assurance that allows you to draw near to God. And that with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled that cleanse us from a guilty conscience, this picture of what Jesus' blood shed on the cross did for us, and having our bodies washed with pure water. This is a picture of baptism. And by the way, we're having a baptism next weekend. Some of you need to sign up. He says this, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For what? He who promised is faithful. He's faithful. Abraham believed God. He trusted God. And it was credited to him as righteousness. He believed God. You know, in my 20s, I went through a time where I just really felt disillusioned with the church. I remember really beginning to seek and ask God, like, what is, I mean, it sounds kind of lame, but I was like, what's the bare minimum I need to do, God? And God brought this little scripture into my life. It's not on the screen, but I want you to listen to it. One of Jesus' closest friends, in a little letter he wrote, says, here, you want to know what he expects of you? What he's inviting you into? It's this. This is his commandment. This is Jesus' commandment. To believe, you want to know what God wants from you? To believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ. And then what does that produce in your life? This, and to love one another. That's his commandment. To believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another, just as he commanded. And for me, it was like, wow, can it really be that simple? See, the message of resurrection is that it's a new day. You've been invited to boldly come to the presence of God with full assurance. Simply invited to trust in what he accomplished for you. And then out of that, to live his peace and love and reconciliation out into the world as a grateful response. Would you stand? Let's worship him together, and then I'll come back up and invite you to respond.